Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And we're excited that you're joining for Logic Tree's World Logic Day Forum. So we're excited to kick off this next panel titled Creating Balance, Wellness, and Productivity That Supports Growth. We're excited to have as our host, Colleen Johnson, who's the CEO of Scatterspoke. A little bit about Colleen. She's a coach and a trainer. She works with portfolio and enterprise and systems, executive coaching, and does a lot of great work in this space. We're also excited to have Tina Schweiger join us, who's a part of the Logic Tree team for the head of marketing, but also is the co-founder of Mindful Appy. I think we're still waiting on Michelle, but Colleen, do you want to kick us off with our first question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me and inviting this conversation. I think it's so important right now. You know, everybody is burned out and we're seeing employees leave organizations in record numbers. And I think it can feel a little insulting when we talk about self-care to say, go get a massage or take a bath, because a lot of the things that happen when we talk about self-care end up being things that I think are encouraging us to check out and create a growing pile of stuff that we're going to have to address later, right? I think we all felt this the first week of January, this week of January. So Tina, I guess let's kick it off with you. I would love to hear, what tools do you have or do you leverage to try to take care of yourself, to take care of your team if you've got employees, that will enable some growth and productivity without creating a new burden by pushing stuff off their plate?
Oh, it's such a good question, and it is a top issue right now. This burnout. I really, our company is Mindful Appy, so mindfulness is probably our primary tool, and that often looks like just a deep awareness of how we're feeling and the willingness to discuss those feelings with everyone in a way that's open and safe to discuss. It's a little bit different maybe than a lot of companies do, but since that's what we do, we have to walk the walk and practice what we preach. So we do rely a lot on mindfulness, what's going on, maybe just having deeper conversations about emotions and about situations and about context, to really try to get ahead of stressors and get ahead of things that can cause burnout.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part, right? Sometimes I think it's hard to recognize it until you're too far in, right? It's like you don't realize you need it until it's kind of already broken. I think one of the things that we've been working on with some of the team at Scatterspoke is really trying to figure out how do we create some time and space for things earlier, right? Like that. So you can say, and in some ways, I think one of the things that can be helpful there is letting people find a little bit of their passion projects. So how do you help people find things that bring them energy? And if they're feeling run down or feeling overburdened with what's on their plate, how do we find some opportunities for them to do things that get them excited?
What's going on? The other thing that happens is people have lives outside of work. And with COVID and with, any day your kids could get COVID and you could have a household of children while you're trying to do all of your Zoom meetings and work. So just being mindful actually of the fact that that can run over into people's day. And it's not necessarily even just what's on the plate at work, which is always a lot, but seeing people as whole individuals with a whole life and seeing them as choosing to show up at work and do their job and do it well and respecting that fact. And then making space for the other things that they have going on in their life and knowing that oftentimes those things in their life are more important sometimes than what's on the plate at work, and respecting that as well as respecting what's happening in the workplace, which is very important as well.
Yeah. And Michelle, I saw you just joined. Welcome. I know we were having
yes. Hello, everyone. Yes, some technical issues. I thought we were on Google Meet, so I had to transfer over. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Speaking of things we don't have control over, right? Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what this means in your space and to you personally?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And thank you guys for your patience. Yes, I'm Michelle Diamond. I'm a CEO of Elevate Diamond Strategies. So it's a growth strategy development and execution firm. So we focus a lot on new market entry, go to market, M&A sometimes, and then helping companies actually execute. Also, I just finished writing my first book, which is a 10-step guide to creating your own growth strategy for your company. And that's a lot for smaller businesses, startup founders, people who may be cash strapped and can't afford, let's just say, full-blown consulting right now, to help teach them what growth strategy is and how they can use it for their organizations. So when developing a growth strategy, a lot goes into it. And even though I'm charged and my firm is charged with the analytical side, which is you still have to get done, the research side and all that. The majority really is working together with the team. So, there's a lot of stressors and things and a lot of emotional balance that goes into play. So been fortunate enough to work with companies from startup, early growth stage, small to mid cap, all the way up to Fortune 50. And what you find is that, people don't think about the extras. So when you're founding your startup, obviously that's your baby. That's a company you're starting. Even early growth stage, you can, if whether you're raising money or not, you're getting into different rounds. There's a lot that goes into that mentally that takes, it's a lot emotionally that takes, it's a lot in terms of your vision, your goals, and clarifying that sometimes. And being flexible, but then as you bring on employees, then you have to answer to investors and things of that nature. And even if you're a family office or you're coming from that perspective, you still have your generational wealth to protect. You have other aspects, or an executive at a large company, you have a board and all these other variances. And even as the investors, sometimes I'm retained by private equity firms or VCs, and they have stress too, because they're investing. They want to make sure that they're doing something that's a winner. And part of that, again, is balancing the logical aspect of it. Like, okay, how do we look at this company logically? Whether they're patient and can wait for you to, get profitable, or they want you to be profitable right away. I mean, typically that's more private equity. VCs start off on the other end. They're looking to see, like, okay, is this company going to be a fit? Can we add value to this company, because they want to return the investment, and they have people to answer to as well. So I think in the whole ecosystem, like, everyone has to understand sometimes that the majority of what you're doing to make sure that it's effective and it is executable. Like, I always do the development and the execution piece, and the execution piece really has to do a lot with understanding the culture, the personality, and the makeup of the organization, but then all of the stakeholders involved, and at each different stage. Because as you're growing, you could be losing money or stagnant. That's a lot of stress, obviously. No one likes to lose money. You got to figure that out. You got to turn around. You could be incremental and bootstrapping. That's a lot. But when you really say, don't want to do that anymore, we want to, like, accelerate growth, that's a big deal. If you're already growing really rapidly, you need help scaling properly so you don't blow up one day and everything's gone, because unfortunately it's happened. That's a lot of stress as well too. So it's really being able to kind of look at things from different perspective, uniquely tailored to the people, but putting in that other aspect too, because you have to make sure that the road that you take and the strategy that's decided is something that's going to have increase the probability of being effective in order to do that. So all of those things really go into play, even though oftentimes I think as advisors and consultants and interim executive, all these other different things, you focus more on, okay, what are you going to deliver, the analytical, logical side, which is very important too. But 50% or more oftentimes is really just making sure that those other mental and emotional aspects are embedded as well. And that's honestly what is the difference between, a lot of times, like, I have a quote, strategies don't belong on a shelf. That's really the difference a lot of times. Like, okay, I'm just going to do this analysis and this makes sense. But then you don't really incorporate all the other parts of what's really going to make something happen for any company of any size in any growth situation. And really putting those two together is what makes it effective, and then gives people more stake in the game, and then they can be proud of something that they're a part of.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I feel like you're speaking right to my soul, Michelle. We've been in
No.
fundraising mode for Scatterspoke since October, trying to raise a seed round. It is an emotional roller coaster as a founder to go through this process. And, I was just joking with a friend of mine that, if you feel really good about your business and where you are professionally, try to fundraise. It'll really just cut you right down the side, make you feel like you don't really know at all what you're doing. But it really has been very emotional. And, the company we've built, Scatterspoke, is a tool that gathers feedback from teams through retrospectives on a regular cadence, and does pattern matching and identifying issues and looking at sentiment by keyword and language to help elevate up for leadership. Here's some of the things that your teams are talking about. And, when we dig in with our customers around why they need a tool like ours. A lot of times what's happening is teams are getting frustrated because they're having the same conversation over and over, right? It can feel a little bit like Groundhog's Day. So this team gets together and they talk about, you know, we don't have enough capacity to address these problems, or we're having a lot of outages, or we're dealing with a long testing cycle that's making it hard for us to deploy software on time. But they have that same conversation every 2 weeks for 6 months. And you know what? People quit. People don't feel like change is happening, or people are addressing the problems that they're dealing with. And so we try to create a tool here that allows leaders to see those patterns and identify that feedback so that they can do something with it, right? So I guess, Tina, I'll kick it over to you. Like, what kind of things do you have in place to get feedback from your employees and from your teams so that you can see where you need to step in and take some action?
Yes, I love what you're doing with all of the context piece. That's one of the pieces that our tool doesn't really do. It actually just gathers emotional state through experience sampling. So rather than a retrospective or something specific, as time goes on, day in and day out, people's moods and emotions change. And it could be for one reason that's related to the business. It could be for a reason that's unrelated to the business, and looking at patterns over time to see if the decisions that you're making as a leader are impacting the people that you lead. And if you lead large teams or you lead multiple teams, it's often difficult to know where to put your resources. Do you put your resources over here, over there? I guess it's the ability to find the squeakiest wheel and where the frustration is the highest before people quit, because it's very frustrating to do those Groundhog Day conversations where you're in a one-on-one and you're giving feedback about those development cycles that you can't complete or the tools that you're missing, and not feeling like that you're heard and not feeling like any change is happening. And I think that when it comes to logic, this type of data is probably some of the most difficult data to work with because it's so unique to each individual. And what you're doing at Scatterspoke, I find fascinating, because it's another way to take some of that data and like piece it together with the context of what's happening, put that in front of a leader, and then have that leader be able to make some decisions that can actually impact people's well-being, because there's nothing worse than consistent frustration to just feed somebody to the point, or you just beat them down to the point where they just give up because they're completely frustrated. But when you do operate an enterprise at scale, it can be almost impossible to keep up with your organization at a level, at that individual level as well. So simply gathering the emotions, and we meet people where they are. So we just send them a text message, say, how are you feeling right now? Respond with an emoji that represents how you feel. And we take all of there's no Likert scale, there's no links, there's no questionnaires, it's simply a reaction. So we're gathering emotional reactions, and those emotional reactions are the ones that typically do contribute most to blow-ups, to I'm quitting on the spot, I can't take it anymore. Those are driven by emotional state. So trying to understand where those are in the organization and how we can get ahead of them is the tool that we leverage.
Yeah. I feel an integration coming on.
I know, right?
Well, Michelle, from your perspective, when you think about how this translates to strategy, what kind of patterns and indicators do you see that come up that where issues like this, really, like employees not feeling heard or people feeling burned out, especially from a founder perspective, where do you see those start to become inhibitors for people in succeeding with their growth strategy?
It really comes first at the beginning. Once a growth strategy is developed, so a lot of times, even when I'm working with companies, like, and I've been fortunate, I've worked with like 65 companies in 31 different industries. So people it's all over the place, right? But at the same time, it's not, which is great, because I look for commonalities and best practices across that can be applied at every stage in every industry. And so when I'm working with the companies, the first thing is when I'm working to develop the strategy with the leader, the founder, and whoever else may be on board it's a very open, kind of communicative type of thing. It's not like I go off somewhere and then come back and say, here, it's more like, okay, this is what I'm thinking. This is where I'm seeing, let's make it a little bit more collaborative. And as companies get bigger, that might be the leadership team, the executive team, the board, whoever it is that's a part of it. But even if you're starting off, the principles and the approach is the same. So it's not something that's a big aha. And then as soon as the strategy is developed, and again, your team, yourself, when it's time for all the employees, I'm very, very big on you have to let everybody know what's going on. Unless it's something that's confidential. Obviously, if it's confidential and it's some kind of acquisition or something you can't speak on, that's different. But for the most part, the biggest thing is communication. Employees want to know from the, one entry level all the way up. They want to know what's going on. They want to know how what they do contributes to the company and what they're a part of on a bigger, from a bigger scale. Now, social is very important now, of course, and culture and what we're doing for the environment and all of that. But even just from a growth strategy perspective, before ESG was the big mainstay or the focal point that everyone's making it now, or at least in the past decade or so, it's like, you want to know when you go to work, okay, you want to feel good. Like, okay, if the company's increasing their revenue, how am I contributing to them increasing their revenue? Sometimes it happens when you do your one-on-ones and things like that. But oftentimes, especially when you're first starting out building an organization, your founder, you're still building your organization, you're still building your infrastructure, you're still figuring all of these things out. And sometimes communication can fall by the wayside. So to the extent that you let them know that they have skin in the game, it is so important to make them feel that way. And then once they do, the second most important thing is, and this is so simple, but you'd be so surprised, no matter what size the company is, what people don't do, an organization don't do, follow up on the feedback. Like it's not rocket science, but it is hardly ever done. And I can tell you, like I said, I work with all companies, all sizes. It could be Fortune 50, or it could be a startup. It doesn't really matter. You have to follow up. So all these things you're talking about, which I think is great, the type of tools you have and what you're doing to assess the feedback and the emotions of the employees, those are so super important. What's even more important is once you get that information, you do something with it, right? So if you have collective feedback, on the verbal side and employees are saying certain things, you want to address it, because guess what? The more you address the feedback, and for customers too, because a lot of companies don't do it with customers either, all of your stakeholders, the minute you ask for their feedback, let them know they're heard by saying, oh, yes, we received your feedback and we've done A, B, C, or D, or we can't do A, B yet, but we will think about doing it. Just really communicate it out, and the emotional part as well. Someone can say, oh my gosh, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed. If you just say, okay, great, we know this employee is stressed out and overwhelmed, they may quit. Like you don't want to be in fire mode all the time. You want to say, well, what can we do to address this issue? And is it an individual issue or is it a collective one? Because again, developing and then executing a strategy, making sure your organization continues to grow, incorporates all these things. You can't do it without your employees, you can't do it without your stakeholders, but you also can't do it if you just have this information and you don't do anything with the information. You have to make information actionable, and then you have to circle back. And then what you'll find, you'll have more loyal employees, you'll have better, more healthier stakeholders, you'll have everything all around, because everyone knows where you're at. And the more honest you are with it, because sometimes you can't do everything, but just let people know they're heard and this is what we're doing. But then to the extent that you can do something about it and they see that, then that's something that's going to give them even more skin in the game emotionally and mentally. And that's going to add to your top and bottom line.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're talking a little bit here about strategy and how we make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and our employees by being mindful of what's going on for them, responding to feedback. But I want to switch gears a little and talk about the productivity piece of this, right? So, I think that we're, Michelle, Tina, we're all like, we're trying to run businesses, we're trying to help businesses grow, and things can't come to a standstill. I've spent a lot of my career doing agile coaching and helping organizations adopt and transform into an agile business and an agile, especially an agile software organization. And a lot of what we focus on with them is reducing the amount of work in progress. And there's a lot of psychology behind that, right? We tend to take on so much stuff and we want to start things. Starting things is more fun, let's be honest. We want to start a bunch of things, and new things come up, and we're constantly pulling more work in, and it becomes really hard for us to get things over the finish line. And so I work with a lot of organizations from a productivity standpoint on how do we focus on reducing how many things we have, getting them small, right? So we can get them over the finish line sooner. And I believe there's a lot of powerful psychology in those small wins, right? Checking the box. I'm a list maker, checking things off, getting things over that finish line. So how do you translate this for your organization or Michelle organizations that you work with into helping them stay productive and keeping the ball rolling forward while still being mindful of taking care of their employees' mental health?
Growth strategy is about what to do as well as what not to do. Like it's complex, but it's as simple as that at the end of the day. And part of that is knowing how to prioritize. Like you always, any company, anywhere has a world of opportunities, right? You can go a lot of different ways, in terms of, okay, this is potential options here, this market here, this customer base here, this organization here, like this product, this service, like you have so many different choices. But the biggest thing is about structuring all that to say, okay, this is the world of opportunities based on our analysis, based on where the gaps are, based on where we think we can add the most value. Here is where we're going to go. Right. That's what the whole thing is about. When I do that with companies, what I broke down in my book in the 10 steps, that's what will help. I found an entrepreneur do it too. I go through all that in terms of like, okay, these are the 10 steps that you have to create your own growth strategy for your company. This is what you follow. This is how you get to that place. It's not just, oh, we have a great idea, let's just run and do that. It's like, let's funnel it through our criteria and prioritize. So when you get to that place where this is the initiative, or if these are the 3 initiatives or whatever it is, because depending on the organization size, there's only so much you can handle. Then it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And that's part of the communicating and getting everybody on board. When you're executing that initiative now, you have to create the strategic plan. Then you have to make sure that that's being followed. You have to have ownership. You have to have touch points. You have to have progress, but you have to constantly make sure that since this is what we're going after, everyone's on the same page. We have a way to do that, verbally, but we also have a way to do that concrete process wise, to be able to have these checkpoints and make sure that we're on track so that we can be productive. Because then you're right, everyone will be all over the place. And a lot of times companies will be all over the place, honestly, because they don't communicate. I want to say this really quick because I know I want you to speak to but one time I had a company and I was brought in when they got a new president. This was a business unit of a very large company, a small business unit though, like $35 million business unit after they acquired a company. And he brought me in to go and review their strategy, make sure it made sense. I went through all of this stuff, all the great consulting analysis stuff. And at the end of the day, I brought in his team, the acquired company's team. They realized when I just talked to everybody that they had 40 initiatives going on with this little company, and they had no idea because they never talked to each other. And with everything else that I did, all the research analysis, that was what they were like so excited about. Oh my gosh, we have 40 things going on. And I got them to whittle it down to 8 through like a facilitation session with the senior management team by just, again, like you said, prioritizing, focusing, being productive. Where are we going with this combined company now after this acquisition? What are our goals? Let's make sure that whatever everyone's working on is in alignment with these goals. And then from there, we can parse off who's responsible for what. And it was like revolutionary for them. It was a list. Seriously, that big. But that's how you do it. But again, even though that company that business unit wasn't very big, it can happen anywhere. And I think that's how you do the most productive. And then in terms of wellness, again, like we mentioned earlier, and I think everyone said on this panel earlier, is really about making sure people feel important, they feel valued. Where people are mentally and emotionally, as well as productivity wise. And their productivity is obviously measured by their output in terms of how they are lining up with their goals. But the biggest thing is that they have to know what to do. If an employee or executive or otherwise doesn't know what the heck they're doing, or they'll do whatever they think is best. And that's nothing wrong with that. But then that's how you get 40 initiatives for a very small company and everyone just doing all these different things, some of which aligned with growth, some of which didn't. But then fortunately, once they got back on track, then they were able to achieve and exceed their goals. So that's the type of thing that can be done at any size and any stage. But, really making sure that you have those 2 things in place is really important.
I love that. It makes me think of that, they say if you are having trouble sleeping or your mind is racing, to write down all the things you need to do before you go to bed. I think we have all these like micro strategies we have for managing things for ourselves. But when we get into a big organization with 40 initiatives in progress, we forget, right, how much just simple visibility and focus, whittling some of those projects down can help us get things done. Tina, what does this look like at Mindful Appy?
I've done consulting for so many years with human-centered design and design thinking. What you're talking about, Michelle, I've seen it countless times, and almost every business has taken on too many initiatives. And what you're describing, it reminded me of the importance and difficulty matrix, which I like because it's a very logical way to take a massive amount of initiatives and information and first ranking them in stack rank order by which one is the most important. And what that does is it forces people to have a conversation, not about the what they're going to do or why they're going to do it or why their initiative is the most important, but it actually causes folks to come together and align on which of these initiatives is most important for the objective of what the growth strategy is of the business, which one is going to get us farther down the road. And then you stack rank them in order of difficulty. You end up with a matrix. And what I like about that process is it is taking a whole bunch of information and a whole bunch of things out of different stakeholders' minds that they really hold in their minds, visualizing it all. And once you do stack rank it in both directions, it becomes pretty clear to people what the initiatives to be, what they should be. What is the lowest cost, highest impact? Let's go there first. Sometimes it's a little bit of a rank down from the top level growth strategy, but maybe once you figure out what that growth strategy is and where you're pointed, how do you kind of rank and figure out all those initiatives? The other thing that does come up to me as we're talking is something I've been thinking about a lot lately is a lot of times employers put employee well-being, like the burden of well-being, on the employee. So they create an EAP, they create resources, they put them up on a website, and they stick them there and like, here's our employee well-being program, now go help yourself, like a self-service buffet. But what we've been talking about at Mindful Appy is actually a little bit different. It is, let's have the burden of the employee well-being actually fall on the leadership of the business as well. And what kind of steps can they take to actually proactively ask questions about how people are feeling? And we, in the last panel session, I think that since COVID, they're saying, oh, it used to be start a meeting and say, how are you doing? And just kind of answer, oh, I'm doing great. And now it's like, well, how are you really doing? Because, a million things could be going on. So those are the two things that came up as Michelle was talking that I just put a pin in that I wanted to just speak to a little bit.
Yeah, and I like that when you were talking about that prioritization and that visibility, you really rooted it in data, it sounds like, right? And so I think the other part that's really nice about that, especially when there's a million things going on and you're adding stress outside of work, right, is it makes it really concrete what you need to do next. So you're removing some subjectivity out of the conversation and you're really getting into more, truly data-driven decision-making and data-driven prioritization that way.
And you can get help. You can share what your vision is. Here's my vision of what's important to me. Well, here's your vision of what's important to you. Well, what's important for what we're doing together, and where do those things overlap and align? And that does really help.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I was just going to say that I skipped over with the story, but yes, in my firm at Elevate Time and Strategy, we do the same thing. We use evaluative criteria. So come up with like a really big list of evaluative criteria. And even part of that workshop that I mentioned before with that senior management team that I do with all the companies too, is you say, all right, of these criteria, which are the most important? And it's almost like every opportunity or initiative will funnel through that criteria, and then you assign weights to them and you rank and prioritize them. So it definitely is rooted in data as well. And in terms of, you can, and then what comes up in terms of the highest number based on what we're saying is the most important criteria, that's really how you prioritize the initiatives from there. And then you figure out how many you can handle. Like most organizations can only handle really 2 to 3, like major ones per year. Some bigger obviously can handle more, but and some maybe even 1. But that's how they're able to go ahead and prioritize that out, and how we're able to kind of whittle that down using that criteria and using the actual numbers and logic and the data assigned to it. And where people couldn't really fight over that because they all agreed on the criteria and agreed on the weights. So once you agree on the criteria, you agree on the weights, then everything else that funnels through is more like, okay, then you have more of an acceptance of it. So yeah, we do similar things. That I think you have a different stint because different purview because of what you do in Tina, but I definitely get it, because that's definitely the same thing that I do in my practice as well.
And Michelle, how often do you see organizations too, where you go in and it's like, well, we have one top priority across 8 different categories. So we have like a strategy number 1 and an employee number 1 and a go-to-market number 1. So there's really still a million things that are all in flight, but they've figured out a way to segment them to try to have multiple number 1s.
You know what? Sometimes they do, but like everything else in life, not everything is always black and white. So sometimes there's, I always say like, you have goals and then you have sub goals, right? You have your overall goal. So if your overall goal is to grow from, 2 to 20 million in 2 years or 10 to 100 million in 3 years or whatever it is, that's your overriding goal, right? And then you have sub goals within that. So the sub goals within that can be something as we want to increase employee productivity, or we want to improve our infrastructure, or we want to improve these, well, there can be other offshoots as well. But I think that the balance and the nuance and the kind of the dance really is just kind of figuring out, okay, we do have these other priorities as well, but we still have to not lose sight of the overriding priority. That's like you're saying, we're using logic here, right? That's the difference between having an idea and not having focus and just kind of running all over the place. You have to have some kind of structure. And then within that structure, as long as you can say, okay, now we have this sub goal that's addressing this area, but it is tied to our primary goal, and this is how it's going to be done, then I think that's a more of a better argument, while not losing sight of the overall goal, right? Because I think that's the other thing that companies are understanding now with COVID, but even before, even though it wasn't said, is that it's important that you look at employee wellness and mental health and productivity, and that is extremely important. But you also want to make sure that you still balance with making sure that things get done in an organization, and that's something that's important as well.
Well, thank you both for joining the panel today, and thank you to everybody who was listening. I hope this gave some useful tips and ways to think about either personal productivity or organizational productivity, and how you can leverage some logic and tools to manage your well-being so that you're not coming to a full stop. And I'll kick it back over to Chelsea.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much to Michelle, Colleen, and Logic Tree's own Tina for sharing about your experience in this balanced productivity growth space. We're really excited for the work that you all are doing and happy that you were able to join us today. We are now going to transition into our next panel. Fun fact, we've gotten a little bit better at this, so it shouldn't take too long. So bear with us and we'll bring in our next round of panelists.
Thanks, Grace.
All right, thank you.